The secret ranking list was taped to the underside of the bottom drawer in my new dorm room, folded into fourths, hidden behind a strip of peeling blue tack, and written in the neat color-coded handwriting of a girl everyone called Kind. I found it at 6:12 a.m. because the drawer jammed when I tried to shove in my winter sweaters, and because in my first life, that same drawer had stayed unopened until after my scholarship was gone, my dorm contract canceled, and my name placed on a disciplinary report as the unstable girl who couldn't handle communal living. This time, I had moved rooms 1 week earlier than before. This time, I was kneeling on cold laminate floor with dust on my knees, staring at a list titled Dean's Welfare Meeting, Priority Narratives, while the kettle in the shared kitchenette screamed like it had seen the future too. Under my name, someone had written, Evelyn Park, financially vulnerable, socially isolated, likely to overreact if accused. Useful if housing audit needs scapegoat. Below mine were 12 other names, ranked from easy pressure to protected avoid. Beside each name sat weaknesses, scholarship status, family problems, mental health rumors, discipline notes, and suggestions for how to push us into signing statements against each other. The dean's meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. that morning. In my first life, I walked into it blind and walked out branded. In this life, I held the list up to the pale dorm window, saw the watermark from the Residential Leadership Committee, and whispered, "Not today." I had woken up 8 days earlier in the old room, room 3B, the room that smelled of cheap perfume, instant noodles, and betrayal. My roommate, Clara Wren, was asleep across from me with her silk eye mask on and her phone glowing under her pillow. The date on my own phone was Monday, September 14th, which should have been impossible because the last thing I remembered was November rain, the campus footbridge, and the feeling of my scholarship email becoming a stone in my pocket. In my first life, I had not jumped. That is important. I had simply stood too long on a bridge with cold hands and no plan, while people I once trusted argued in group chats about whether I had stolen bursary money, bullied a resident advisor, and leaked private housing complaints. Then a cyclist swerved, I stepped back, slipped on wet metal, and the world vanished sideways. When I opened my eyes again, Clara was still snoring gently under fairy lights, and my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Morning, Evie. Don't forget tonight's floor meeting. Big welfare thing coming. Just agree with me, and you'll be fine." In the first life, I had agreed with Clara because she was our dorm's golden resident advisor, the girl who remembered birthdays, walked drunk freshmen home, and knew how to cry during leadership speeches. In the second life, I read the message and finally understood the threat folded inside the favor. Just agree with me, and you'll be fine meant disagree, and I decide what fine looks like. Northbridge Hall was the oldest residence on campus, which meant the brochures called it historic and the students called it mold with Wi-Fi. The building had narrow staircases, heavy fire doors, and walls so thin you could hear 3 different heartbreaks before breakfast. To outsiders, it looked like community. Study circles in the common room, charity bake sales, late-night tea, borrowed hoodies, handwritten welcome notes. Inside, it ran on information. Who missed rent by 2 days? Who cried after call with home? Who had medication in the bathroom cabinet? Who drank too much? Who had a scholarship clause requiring good residential standing? Clara understood the building better than anyone because she had turned care into surveillance. She asked questions with warm eyes. She remembered answers in spreadsheets. She called it pastoral leadership. In my first life, when the hall budget audit discovered missing welfare grant vouchers and falsified maintenance reimbursements, Clara already had a story prepared. Stressed scholarship students abusing the support system, petty conflicts becoming accusations, Evelyn Park at the center because I had access, resentment, and a pattern of emotional reactions. I did not even know what vouchers were missing until the dean asked why my student ID appeared beside them. Clara cried harder than I did and said she had tried to protect me. The panel believed the girl with committee minutes, not the girl who had never learned to document kindness when it turned poisonous. Rebirth did not make me brave immediately. It made me nauseous. For the first 2 days, I lived in a strange double exposure. Clara pouring cereal across from me while first life Clara sat in a dean's office describing my volatility, Clara braiding a homesick freshman's hair while First Life Clara forwarded screenshots of that freshman's panic attacks. Clara leaving a sticky note on my desk saying, "You're doing amazing," while First Life Clara signed the statement that removed me from housing. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream the names of the missing vouchers and the dean's exact wording, and the way her mouth trembled only when adults were looking. Instead, I became very quiet. Quiet in the first life had made me look guilty. Quiet in the second became listening. At the Monday floor meeting, Clara announced that a welfare review was coming because some residents may have misunderstood emergency support policies. Misunderstood. A soft word for theft when you intend to hand the bill to someone powerless. She passed around tea. She asked us to speak honestly. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "Evie, you've used support services before, right? Maybe you can help explain how easy it is to get confused." 20 faces turned toward me. The old me would have laughed nervously and said yes to escape attention. The reborn me looked at her hand until she removed it. "I've used the food pantry through official sign-in," I said. "Not emergency vouchers. I need to read the policy." The room chilled by 1 degree. Clara smiled with teeth. "Of course. Policies." That night, I requested a dorm transfer. In the first life, I stayed in 3B because leaving felt dramatic and expensive, and because Clara told me moving would look like I was avoiding responsibility. This time, I walked to residential services before breakfast with my scholarship letter, my anxiety, and a sentence I had rehearsed until it became stone. I need to move rooms due to a conflict of interest with my resident advisor before the welfare audit meeting. The receptionist blinked. Students asked to move because of noise, mold, exes, and occasionally ghosts. Conflict of interest was not a normal dorm phrase. She called the deputy housing manager, Ms. Ibarra, who had the expression of someone who survived entirely on black coffee and suspicion. I did not accuse Clara of crimes. I said my RA was encouraging residents to make informal statements about welfare support and had singled me out publicly despite my scholarship dependence. I showed the message, "Just agree with me and you'll be fine." Ms. Ibarra read it twice. "Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight if we move you?" she asked. The word safe nearly broke me. In the first life, safety had always arrived after damage, wrapped in regret. "Anywhere," I said. She gave me a temporary key to room 1D, a storage converted single near the laundry, and told me not to discuss the move until it was complete. When I returned to pack, Clara was sitting on my bed. She held one of my folded sweaters in her lap, like a prop from a sad play. "Moving out?" she asked softly. "Temporary transfer." Without telling me, her eyes shone with the first layer of tears, not enough to spill, just enough to accuse. Residential services approved it. "Evie, this looks bad." There it was, the phrase that had ruled my first life. Looks bad. Not as bad. Looks bad. Clara's kingdom was built from appearances arranged before truth could arrive. "Then it can look bad in the correct office," I said. She flinched just a little. "I was trying to help you." "With what?" "The meeting. The audit. People are nervous. If you separate yourself now, it makes you seem—" She paused, searching for a word that would sound caring and land like a threat. "Uncooperative." I zipped my suitcase. "Noted." She stood. "You know, single rooms are usually for documented needs. People might ask why you got special treatment." I looked at her then. Really looked. The soft cardigan, the messy bun, the concerned mouth, the girl who knew exactly which rumors to plant because she had already harvested every resident's insecurity. "Let them ask residential services," I said. That was the first time I saw fear move behind her eyes. Not because I had power, because I had redirected the conversation somewhere she did not control. Room 1D was barely a room. It was a long box with a narrow bed, one window facing the bins, and a desk scarred by years of students carving initials into cheap wood. It smelled faintly of detergent from the laundry next door, which I found comforting because detergent was at least honest about trying to clean things. The wardrobe door stuck. The radiator hissed like an angry cat. The bottom drawer under the bed would not open more than 6 centimeters. I was too exhausted to care at first. I shoved my suitcase against it and slept 14 hours in my coat. For the next week, I built a life around documentation. I photographed my old room after moving out. I emailed residential services confirming I had returned the 3B key. I signed the food pantry log in person and took no vouchers, no cash cards, no informal support forms. I stopped answering Clara's private messages and replied only in the dorm group chat or email. Every time she wrote, "Can we talk like friends?" I wrote, "Please send any housing-related information through official channels." It made me sound cold.
Good.
Warmth had been the temperature at which she cooked evidence in the first life. Cold preserved things. Clara changed tactics by Wednesday. Since she could not frame my silence as confession in private, she framed my caution as betrayal in public. In the common room, I heard her tell Jonah from 2A, "I'm worried Evelyn thinks everyone is against her. I don't want her to isolate before the dean's meeting." I walked in before Jonah could answer. Clara's face softened instantly.
Evie.
"We were just talking about you." I heard. Jonah looked at his mug, as if hoping to drown in it. Clara stepped toward me.
I'm blah.
"Maybe it's better to clear the air." Pattern interruption. I took out my phone and placed it on the table.
Sure.
"I'm happy to discuss the audit with residential services present." Her smile twitched. "That's not what community means. Community shouldn't require private pressure." Jonah's head lifted. "Not much. Enough." Clara's gaze flashed toward him, then back to me. "You're making people uncomfortable." "Good," I said before I could stop myself. The word landed strangely, too blunt for the room. I corrected, calmer. "Uncomfortable is better than misinformed." Clara's cheeks flushed. For a second, nobody moved. Then the microwave beeped, violently cheerful, and Jonah whispered, "My soup," like soup had rescued him from moral responsibility. The secret ranking list entered my life because of that jam drawer. On the morning of the dean's meeting, I woke at 5:40 from a nightmare of first life Clara placing tissues in front of me during the disciplinary panel, telling me it was okay to admit I needed help. I was sweating, tangled in sheets, and too awake to pretend sleep would return. So I started unpacking the last suitcase. Winter sweaters, old notebooks, a framed photo of Mum and me at my high school graduation. The bottom drawer refused to open. I pulled harder. It scraped, caught, then gave way with a sound like cardboard tearing. Inside was a dead pen, a hair tie, 3 coins, and a folded piece of paper taped to the underside with blue tack, so old it had gone gray. At first, I thought it was some previous student's exam cheat sheet or love note. Then I saw the heading, Dean's Welfare Meeting, Priority Narratives. My own name was halfway down the first page. Evelyn Park, financially vulnerable, socially isolated, likely to overreact if accused. Useful if housing audit needs scapegoat. I did not scream. My body went beyond screaming into perfect stillness. The kettle in the kitchenette began to whistle because I had filled it on autopilot minutes earlier. I stayed kneeling with the list in my hand while steam shrieked through the wall. The second page had columns: resident, vulnerability, leverage, suggested framing, risk level. Jonah, mother recently ill, needs accommodation extension, pressure through deadline. Priya, undocumented counseling visits, avoid written threats, emotionally suggestible. Nella, international student, visa anxiety, use policy breach language carefully. Marcus, protected by parent donor, avoid unless necessary. Clara had ranked us like pantry stock. The list was not signed. Clara was too careful for that. But it had her fingerprints in every phrase. Useful if housing audit needs scapegoat. Emotionally suggestible. Avoid written threats. Those were not words from a nervous resident. They were operational notes. At the bottom of the second page was something even better and worse. A printed footer from the Residential Leadership Committee shared drive, with a date from 2 months earlier and a file path ending in welfare_audit_strategy_CW_draft. CW, Clara Wren. My hands started shaking so violently the paper rattled. In the first life, I had not found this list until after the dean's decision, when room 1D became mine permanently because nobody else wanted to live beside the laundry. By then, The list was dismissed as unverified material because I had touched it, moved it, cried over it, and brought it in after being punished. This time, the meeting had not happened yet. The list was not a desperate afterthought. It was contemporaneous evidence hidden in university property before the accusation formed. I placed it exactly where I found it, took photos from multiple angles, filmed myself opening the drawer and showing the tape, then called Ms. Ibarra's emergency housing number. My voice sounded far away when I said, "I found a document in room 1D that appears to relate to today's dean meeting. It includes private resident vulnerabilities and suggested narratives." There was a pause. Then Ms. Ibarra said, "Do not remove it. I'm coming now." She arrived in 11 minutes, wearing a coat over gym clothes and the expression of a woman whose worst suspicions had just grown legs. With her was Mr. Albright from Student Conduct, a gentle-looking man carrying evidence sleeves that made my stomach twist. They photographed the drawer. They removed the paper with gloves. They recorded the room number, time, and my statement. I kept waiting for someone to ask why I had been digging, why I moved rooms, why the list had my name, why I always seemed to be near trouble. First life fear is repetitive that way. It expects the same blow because it knows the shape of the hand. But Ms. Ibarra only asked, "Who knew you were assigned this room?" I thought,
You.
the receptionist. Maybe Clara, if she checked the transfer board. Ms. Ibarra's mouth tightened. "The transfer board is not public to our ace." Mr. Albright looked up. "But committee leads can see temporary occupancy." Committee leads. Clara was Residential Leadership Committee chair. The net tightened not around me. Around the room, she thought she still controlled. Ms. Ibarra asked whether I felt able to attend the dean's meeting. "Yes," I said. Then, after one breath, "But not alone." Her face softened by exactly 1 degree. "You will not be alone." At 9:20, before the dean's meeting, Clara sent me a message. "Whatever happens today, remember, I tried to keep things gentle. Some truths are easier when you accept them early." I stared at it in the hallway outside residential services while Ms. Ibarra printed copies of my transfer record. The old Evelyn would have replied, begged, asked what she meant, giving Clara fresh material to crop and frame. I took a screenshot and sent no answer. At 9:37, Jonah messaged, "Are we supposed to meet Clara first before Dean?" Then Priya. Clara said group alignment matters. Then Nella. She told me not to mention voucher dates unless asked. Is that normal? My chest tightened. The list was not theoretical. It was active. Clara had spent the morning moving residents like pieces into the narratives she had written. I forwarded the messages to Ms. Ibarra, who read them without blinking. "We are changing the meeting format," she said. That was the first real crack in Clara's plan. She had prepared for a dean's meeting where residents entered separately, scared, primed, and easy to contradict. Instead, the dean would see the map before the pieces arrived. The dean's conference room was too elegant for the kind of damage it had done in my first life. Long walnut table, bottled water, university crest on the wall. Windows overlooking the courtyard where students sat on grass pretending institutions were abstract. In the first life, I sat alone at the far end while Clara sat beside Dean Moray with a folder of statements and a tissue pressed to her nose. This time, when I entered, Ms. Ibarra walked in beside me, Mr. Albright behind us, and the secret ranking list already sealed in a clear folder on the table. Dean Moray was there, silver-haired and grave, along with finance, conduct, and 2 residential committee advisors. Clara arrived last. That mattered. She opened the door with her usual soft urgency, a folder clutched to her chest, eyes already damp. Then she saw me not in the accused chair, but beside Ms. Ibarra. She saw the evidence sleeve. She saw Mr. Albright's notebook. For 1 second, her face emptied. Completely. No kindness, no concern, no tears. Just calculation encountering a missing floor. Then the mask returned. "I'm sorry," she said, looking around the room. "I thought this was the welfare audit meeting." Dean Moray folded his hands. "It is. We are beginning with a matter concerning resident privacy and pre-meeting influence." Clara's fingers tightened on her folder. "Of course." The first half hour was procedural, which made it more terrifying than shouting. Mr. Albright explained that a document had been found in a university room assigned to a resident involved in the audit. The document contained private information about multiple residents and suggested narrative strategies. Dean Moray asked Clara whether she recognized the file path. She leaned forward, brows drawn. It looks like a committee draft, but I don't know that version. Smart. Not denial.
Distance.
Committee drafts go through many hands. Mr. Albright asked whether she had prepared welfare audit strategy documents. We prepared general risk notes to support vulnerable residents, she said. Not to pressure anyone. Ms. Ibarra slid my screenshot across the table. Just agree with me, and you'll be fine. Clara's face pinched. That was taken out of context. Evelyn was spiraling about the meeting. I laughed. I did not mean to. It burst out one sharp sound.
Everyone looked at me.
In the first life, a laugh would have been labeled unstable. This time, Ms. Ibarra said, Evelyn, you'll have a chance to respond. The difference between being managed and being protected is sometimes one sentence from the right person. I swallowed and nodded. Then Dean Moray read my entry aloud. Evelyn Park, financially vulnerable, socially isolated, likely to overreact if accused. Useful if housing audit needs scapegoat. Hearing it in his voice did something strange to the room. Written cruelty can hide behind handwriting. Spoken by an adult in daylight, it sounded exactly as ugly as it was. Clara's eyes filled. I would never write that. The footer identifies a draft under your committee initials, Mr. Albright said. Could someone have used my initials? Possibly. We are preserving drive logs. Drive logs. Clara blinked. There it was. She had prepared people, stories, tears. She had not prepared for the university's shared drive to remember timestamps better than residents remembered conversations. Finance then raised the voucher issue. Missing food cards, duplicate emergency transport forms, maintenance reimbursement requests tied to student IDs. In the first life, those documents pointed at me because Clara arranged them to. This time, Finance had already paused the discussion after seeing the ranking list. We are now treating the resident ID entries as potentially manipulated, the finance officer said. Access logs show several voucher requests were submitted through the residential leadership kiosk after hours. Clara said, many residents use that kiosk. Ms. Ibarra replied, but only committee leads can override missing PIN verification. The room shifted. Clara's tears spilled at last, but they arrived late, like an actor missing her cue. Other residents were brought in after that, not one by one into Clara's prepared traps, but in pairs with Ms. Ibarra present and the list used as context. Jonah admitted Clara told him his extension request might be denied if he contradicted the committee timeline. Priya showed messages where Clara suggested mentioning my unpredictability if asked why voucher records were messy. Nella, voice shaking, said Clara warned her that visa compliance could be affected by housing policy breaches, which was not true and cruel enough that Dean Moray's jaw tightened visibly. Marcus, the donor-protected student marked, avoid unless necessary, confirmed Clara never asked him for a statement despite his frequent use of the same common room printer and kiosk.
Pattern.
That word entered the meeting quietly, then took over the table. The missing vouchers no longer looked like scattered misuse by vulnerable residents. They looked like a system accessible to one leadership student, covered by narratives against those least able to fight. Clara watched each statement land. She stopped crying after Priya spoke. That was almost worse. Tears were for performance. Silence was for survival. When it was my turn to speak, I expected anger to carry me. It did not. My voice came out calm, almost flat. I described my food pantry usage, my lack of voucher access, Clara's public comments, the transfer request, the discovery of the list, and the messages from other residents that morning. I did not mention my first life. I did not mention the bridge, the rain, the first disciplinary letter that had taught me how institutions can mistake distress for guilt. I simply gave the timeline. I am financially vulnerable, I said, looking at the dean because shame hates eye contact, and I was done feeding it. That does not make me dishonest. I am socially isolated because I work and study, Not because I am unstable. I did overreact in the first meeting in my head before it happened because I was scared. But being scared of a false accusation is not evidence that the accusation is true. Nobody interrupted. Clara looked down at her hands. For the first time since I had known her, she had no better story to offer. Dean Moray removed his glasses. Thank you, Evelyn. 2 words. Not enough to repair the other life. Enough to hold this one open. The meeting did not end with a confession. Real exposure rarely does. Clara did not stand up and announce she stole welfare vouchers, manipulated residents, and planned to feed me to the audit. She requested representation. She said she felt overwhelmed by leadership responsibilities. She said committee documents were collaborative and perhaps poorly worded. She said her concern for residents had been misunderstood. Each sentence was a small boat pushed into a sea already full of holes. By noon, she was suspended from RA duties pending investigation. By 1, her access to residential systems was revoked. By 3, all voucher records tied to vulnerable resident IDs were frozen for review instead of sent to conduct panels. My scholarship office received a note confirming no adverse residential standing would be issued during the investigation. I read that note on a bench outside the residence building while my hands shook around my phone. No adverse residential standing. In my first life, those words had arrived too late in reverse. This time, they arrived before the stain. I pressed the phone to my chest and breathed like someone surfacing. The days after were uglier than I expected. People like Clara do not fall alone because they have spent too long tying others to their balance. Some residents were angry at her. Some were angry at me for making the hall feel unsafe, as if the list had been cozy before I found it. Others were frightened that statements they had signed under pressure would make them look complicit. Jonah avoided me for 2 days, then left a protein bar outside my door with a note that said, "Sorry I froze." Priya cried in the laundry room and said she felt stupid for trusting Clara with counseling information. Nella asked whether the university could really protect her visa status, and Ms. Ibarra personally walked her to international student support. The building's warmth had always been fake in places, but fake warmth still leaves people cold when it burns out. I kept expecting to feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired and oddly responsible, though I knew responsibility was another trap women are trained to carry when systems fail publicly. My mother called every night. I had told her more in this life than the first, though still not about rebirth. "Keep your door locked," she said.
Eat rice.
"Send me copies." Love in our family had always been practical. Clara moved out by Friday. Not permanently expelled, not yet, but removed from Northbridge Hall during the investigation. I saw her in the courtyard carrying 2 suitcases while a housing officer waited near the gate. She wore no cardigan, no RA lanyard, no soft authority. Just jeans, a gray coat, and a face stripped of its usual careful light. For one moment, I thought she would walk past. Instead, she stopped in front of me. The courtyard seemed to notice and quiet itself. "Was it worth it?" she asked. Her voice was low, almost curious. "Finding the list? Turning everyone against me." The old Evelyn would have denied the framing, rushed to soften, insisted she did not want anyone against anyone. The reborn Evelyn had learned that some accusations are not questions. "You wrote people into categories so you could use them," I said. "They turned when they read their labels." Clara's mouth tightened. "You think you're different? You used the list too." That landed because it had a shard of truth. Evidence can feel like a weapon even when it is protection. I used it to stop the meeting from becoming a trap. Same thing, prettier story. I looked at her suitcases, at the girl who had built a whole identity from knowing where everyone hurt. "No," I said. "The difference is consent. You collected wounds in secret." I brought the knife to the table. For a second, her eyes shone, and not with performance. "I did help people," she said. "Yes," I answered. "That's why it worked." She flinched. Then the housing officer called her name, and Clara walked away without looking back. The investigation eventually found what the first life never reached in time: Clara had used residential leadership access to redirect emergency food vouchers, submit duplicate transport reimbursements, and erase PIN errors by attaching vulnerable residents' names to messy records. She did not steal a fortune. That almost made it worse. A few $100s in cards, small reimbursements, favors traded through panic. Enough to matter to students who counted coins. Not enough, perhaps, to make outside news. She had also created welfare risk summaries without consent and shared them with select committee members to shape the dean's audit. Some committee members claimed they thought the summaries were official.
Some probably did.
Institutions produce so much paperwork that cruelty can hide inside formatting. Clara received a conduct suspension, lost her RA position, and withdrew for the semester. The university restructured welfare access, removed student leaders from voucher processing, and created confidential support pathways that did not run through dorm popularity politics. It was not perfect. Systems rarely wake up transformed. But the door Clara used was closed. Locked even. Ms. Ibarra told me that during a follow-up meeting, and I smiled for the first time in days. My own life became strangely ordinary afterward. That is another thing stories often skip. After the trap, you still have laundry. You still have tutorials, shifts, overdue readings, and a radiator that hisses like it resents your survival. I kept room 1D for the rest of the term because moving again felt exhausting and because the laundry noise became familiar. The bottom drawer worked after maintenance repaired it. They asked if I wanted the whole bed frame replaced. I said no. Something about that drawer mattered to me. It had jammed because something wrong was hidden there, and once cleared, it opened smoothly. Too symbolic, maybe, but I was allowed one metaphor after dying. Other residents started knocking on my door for help with official forms, which scared me at first because I did not want to become a new Clara, a new doorway everyone had to pass through. So I made a rule. I would show people where the office was, not become the office. Here's the link. Here's who to email. Put it in writing. Boring advice. Life-saving advice. Jonah joked that I had become the hall's unofficial PDF fairy. I told him I preferred that to scapegoat. Dean Morey called me in at the end of semester. I entered the same conference room with my stomach tight and my hands cold, but this time there was no evidence sleeve on the table, no Clara, no list. Just the dean, Ms. Ibarra, and a letter. My scholarship standing was confirmed. My housing record was clean. The university offered me a small residential equity grant to cover the disruption, which made me laugh because disruption was an elegant word for discovering you had been pre-selected for sacrifice. I accepted it anyway. Pride does not pay rent. Dean Morey apologized carefully, institutionally, but with enough human shame in his eyes that I believed some of it. We allowed student leadership to become a gatekeeping structure, he said. That harmed people. I nodded. Yes. The old me would have rushed to reassure him that it was okay. The reborn me let the sentence sit. Adults should hear the full weight of their apologies. Before I left, Ms. Ibarra handed me a copy of the new welfare access policy. You'll probably read it more closely than anyone, she said. I did. That night. With tea. It was not thrilling literature, but every line that removed private student control from emergency aid felt like a small window opening. Months later, someone painted over the old Northbridge Hall welcome mural. Clara had designed it the year before, all linked hands and soft pastel slogans about belonging. The new mural was uglier and better. A map of official support services, QR codes, emergency contacts, anonymous reporting pathways, and one sentence in block letters across the top. Care should not require permission from the powerful. Amara, from the art faculty, hated the font. I loved it anyway. First years took selfies in front of it without knowing why it existed. That felt right. The best reforms become boring to people who never needed the old door. I saw Clara once after that, across campus near the library steps. She looked thinner, hair cut shorter, no entourage of grateful residents around her.
We did not speak.
She saw me, paused, then kept walking.
No epalegi. No final confrontation.
Some stories do not give you the satisfaction of remorse. They give you policy changes and a clean record. That has to be enough, and strangely, it was. The equity grant changed something practical before it changed anything emotional. It meant I could cut one late-night cafe shift, which meant I stopped returning to Northbridge after midnight with grease in my hair and lecture notes unread in my bag. At first, the free evening terrified me. I had built so much of my identity around being busy enough not to feel anything that an empty Wednesday looked like a trap. Then Priya knocked with 2 mugs of tea and a packet of biscuits she claimed were therapeutic carbohydrates, and we sat on the laundry room floor because room 1D still had only 1 chair. She told me Clara had once convinced her not to report a broken lock because complaining would make housing think she was unstable. Jonah told me later that he had signed a statement he did not understand because Clara said the dean already knew everything. Nella admitted she had considered leaving university rather than risk visa trouble over a policy breach that had never existed. Every story made the list heavier and less personal at the same time. It was not only my nightmare. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me furious in a slower, more useful way. Rage that burns quickly wants a person destroyed. Rage that lasts begins asking who gave that person the keys. That was why I agreed when Ms. Ibarra asked me to sit on the residence policy review panel. I hated every minute of the first meeting. A senior administrator used phrases like student-led care environment and peer empowerment, and I had to grip my pen until my fingers hurt because those words sounded too much like the wallpaper Clara hid behind. When they asked for student input, nobody spoke at first. I knew that silence. It was the silence of students waiting to see whether honesty would be punished later. So I opened my folder and said, peer support is not the problem. Unsupervised access to confidential needs is the problem. If a student has to reveal poverty, illness, family conflict, or immigration fear to another student before receiving emergency help, then the system is not compassionate. It is convenient for staff. The administrator blinked. Ms. Ibarra wrote it down. After that, others spoke. Quietly at first, then with the relief of people discovering the ceiling did not fall when someone named the leak. We recommended locked staff-only voucher processing, anonymous concern forms routed outside the hall, written consent for any welfare notes, and termly audits of student leader access. None of it sounded heroic. It sounded like plumbing. But after living in a building where feelings were used as pipes for power, plumbing felt revolutionary. The hardest consequence was learning that some residents still missed Clara. Not the manipulation, not the threats, but the ease of having someone who knew everything and made decisions feel personal. She did check on me when my dad was sick. Jonas said one night, guilty before I could react. Priya admitted Clara had sat with her after a panic attack until sunrise. Even I had memories like that. Clara bringing me kanji when I had the flu, Clara taping a note to my mirror before my first scholarship interview, Clara remembering my mother's birthday. For a while, I hated those memories because they complicated the clean shape of villainy. Then Ms. Ibarra said something during policy review that stayed with me. Harmful systems often provide real help selectively. That is why people defend them. It let me put 2 truths beside each other without forcing them to fight. Clara had helped people. Clara had harmed people. The help made the harm easier to hide. That did not make the help false, but it made the power dangerous. Once I understood that, I stopped needing my anger to be simple. I still think about the list sometimes. Not because of the cruelty of my entry, though those words carved deep. Financially vulnerable. Socially isolated. Likely to overreact. Useful. I think about how close those words were to truths twisted sideways. I was financially vulnerable. I was isolated. I was likely to react strongly to being framed because any sane person would. Clara did not need to invent me. She only needed to remove my dignity from the facts. That is what dangerous people do. They take real pieces of you and arrange them into a weapon. The defense is not pretending you have no weaknesses. The defense is refusing to let someone else become the narrator of them. Now, when I work with student support groups, I tell residents not to confess their whole lives to anyone simply because they have a lanyard and a soft voice. I tell student leaders that care, without consent, becomes control. I tell scholarship students to put everything in writing, not because they are untrustworthy, but because they are too often asked to survive on vibes from people with keys. So yes, I moved dorm rooms. That sounded small when I wrote it on the transfer form. 1 temporary relocation due to conflict of interest. 1 key returned. 1 bed beside a laundry wall. But that move placed me in the only room where Clara's hidden list still waited, because she had used room 1D as a committee storage space before it became emergency housing, because she trusted forgotten drawers more than frightened residents, because she believed stories mattered more than objects. In my first life, I found the list after the dean's meeting, after her narrative had already hardened around my name. In my second, I found it before she could speak me into guilt. I did not defeat Clara by becoming louder than her. I defeated her by moving out of the room where she controlled the sound, opening a stuck drawer, and letting the university see the script before the performance began. The secret ranking list was ugly. Yes. It was also proof. It showed every wound she planned to press, every resident she planned to bend, every scapegoat she ranked by usefulness. And when Dean Moray read my entry aloud in that polished conference room, the words did not become my shame. They became hers. This time, I did not overreact. I reacted exactly enough. I kept my scholarship, kept my housing, kept my name, and learned that sometimes survival begins with the most ordinary rebellion in the world. Pack your bag, change rooms, and check the drawers.